All right. Testing. All right. Good morning, everyone. Look, that's me. So just a quick reminder for those who are still coming in, if you could make your way down to the front here, and if we could have nobody standing at the back, please. So there'll be no one standing. We need you to be sitting down. Last year we had people blocking the emergency exits because they were standing at the back. Hi everyone, I'm Will. Look, that's me there. And I'm one of the Assistant Secretaries of the Victorian Trades Hall Council. And for those who don't know, that's the peak body of the Victorian Trade Union movement. So I want to welcome you all to the VTHC HSR Conference 2025, which is entitled Reps Against the Machine. Woo! And I want to welcome everyone, whether you are joining us actually here in the room or whether you are at one of our regional venues watching this online. And I also want to give special thanks to our supporters who always make today possible. So that's WorkSafe, Unity Bank, Australian Super, Slater and Gordon Lawyers, Incolink, MGI and Pay Cover by Coverforce. They all have stalls out there, so please make sure that you visit the stalls. Before I introduce the first speaker, I want to remind people that in the unlikely event of an emergency requiring evacuation, please leave your belongings behind and follow venue staff to the designated emergency evacuation point. The VTHC facilitator will conduct a roll call at the assembly area, so please remain there until all attendees are accounted for. All right, so if there's an emergency, go to that area and stay there until we have accounted for everyone. Venue staff will notify you once it's safe to return to the conference room. Now, to open our conference, I'd like to invite Wurundjeri man John Terrick to deliver a welcome to country. John.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How are we all? A bit warm? Damn cold day, wasn't it? Night. Oh yeah, look, I'm John Terrick, Wurundjeri Elder, proud of it. Proud to do welcomes. It's an opportunity for me to represent my people, to make everybody feel welcome on our country. So, Wimajika, Wurundjeri Belak, Yim and Kundibik. Welcome to the lands of my traditional ancestors who cared, walked this land and managed it for thousands of years. Done a damn good job of it in the time too. Welcome to these lands and country to which my traditional ancestors walked and cared for. Sharing life's teachings through culture, gathering, art, stories and dances. Today I pay my respects to my elders, past, present and emerging. As we forge forward with enduring cultures, I ask that you all tread with care, respect for lands, waterways and our people, whose connection to land and country remain unbroken. I just let you know, I believe in the union. When you're together, it's strong. I was a tradesman and I worked around up the East Coast, so I was a union delegate of the AMWU at the time. So may this gathering honour culture, celebrate creativity and strengthen understanding of all who step forward on Wurundjeri country. Wherever you go, you probably hear about Aboriginal culture everywhere. And all we ask is just respect, because we want to work together. Don't matter who it is, we need to work together, build connectivity, unity, be inclusive of everybody. By doing that, we build respect. And when you're in a union, you're the same thing. You know, it's a hard job, but you're building respect with your team, your members. And the stronger you have better respect, the stronger the respect, the stronger the team, the stronger the movement. So we move together, continuing education. Our people educated our people through what I said, dance, music, art, but through gatherings. We took them around our boundaries, taught them how to look after the land, where the boundaries are, prevent intrusion, prevent takeover. This was before colonisation, mind you. But yeah, it was always a hard job. It's like being a union delegate, hard work, but valuable, enduring, worthwhile. It's always hard to be a leader with our people, always constantly fighting something for the rights of your people, for your land, your development of your land, development of your people, development of your culture. You know, wherever you go, it's always a continuous fight, battle. But yeah, look, with elders, I'd like to also welcome any other elders from other areas, but I always add too that I respect people who turn up like this. You take time out of your day to come together to support each other. It's a lot of commitment. So my respects to you and thank you. On that note, I'll walk out and leave you all to get on with your day. Enjoy your day. God bless. Nunguj and thank you.
Thanks, John. John's now going to slink out there. He gets to have the rest of his day. On behalf of everyone attending this conference, I also acknowledge the Wurundjeri people as the traditional custodians of the land, and that their sovereignty was never ceded. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And that acknowledgement has a particular significance for us here in Victoria right now, where treaty has been negotiated. And we in the trade union movement have committed to the First Peoples that we'll do whatever is asked of us to ensure that that treaty delivers, and any future treaties deliver, finally deliver long overdue self-determination and justice to First Nations people. I'm also going to deliver the Victorian Trades Hall Council Statement of Solidarity, which is an expression of the values that we bring to everything we do as trade unionists. We are union. We stand united as part of a great movement of workers. Our diversity is our strength, our solidarity is our power. We respect and take care of each other. Prejudice and discrimination, including misogyny, racism, homophobia, and all other hatreds have no place in our movement. We rise together. Today and every day, we commit ourselves to achieving justice, fairness, equality, and dignity for all workers. Solidarity forever. And at Trades Hall, we believe that everyone should be a union member. Every study tells us the same thing. Unionised workplaces are safer workplaces. So, if you aren't a member, today is as good a day as any to join, and I encourage you to go to the VTHC table at the foyer or go to australianunions.org.au and sign up. Now, before we start the first session, I want to draw your attention to the app that we're going to be using for Q&A throughout the presentations today. If you've been here in previous years, you'll know this. The app is called Slido, and no matter where you are watching this conference, you can log in on your phone to ask questions. So you first go to the website, which is www.slido.com. The customised ID code to promote for all in-person delegates, that's at here today and also at the regional sites, to ask questions is hashtag HSR 2025, and you can ask your questions, and we'll put that information up on slides throughout the day. Now, at this point, what's supposed to be happening is that I'm introducing Luke Hilakari, the Secretary at Trades Hall, to do some introductory comments, but unfortunately Luke, he's gutted, he can't be with us here today, so he has some duties, so the responsibility falls to me. So there we go. Let me start by welcoming the Deputy Premier and Minister for WorkSafe, Ben Carroll, and Ashley West, who's the CEO of WorkSafe, who we're going to be hearing from very shortly. But most importantly, I'd like to welcome and acknowledge the people who have some of our toughest roles in workplaces, and that is all of you, our HSRs. We know that it can be hard to be the person that everyone turns to when there's a safety issue, and that sometimes you feel like you're alone in that fight. Well, look around the room today, you are not alone. Safety is core union business. And today is a day for us to acknowledge your efforts, but also a day for you to touch base with other HSRs and your unions to learn new ideas and to hear about what's working in other workplaces. And that's important because you are standing up for your workmates every day, looking out for their health and safety when bosses put productivity over your safety and well-being. You know more than anyone that nothing at work is worth risking your health over. This is more important than ever in a world where workplaces are being changed fundamentally by technology. Now, technology can be a good thing. It can make our lives and our jobs easier. But whether technology is a good or bad thing depends on how it's deployed, and a real concern we heard from you last year that this technology is being implemented in a way that makes workplaces sometimes less safe. Increasingly, we're seeing surveillance cameras, but also key logging software, GPS tracking, productivity scores, facial recognition being used to track worker activity and increase the pressure to work faster. AI has given employers an unparalleled ability to take all of these data points to make business decisions without proper human oversight, all under the banner of objectivity. We have always known that systems of work that prioritise excessive KPIs, surveillance, micromanagement and high workloads are unsafe. But when a machine is given control over how real human workers do their work without proper oversight or considering the risks of taking away that human decision-making, workers end up being treated like parts of a machine. Rushing in the latest technology means that risks associated with its use aren't properly identified and controlled. Now, there are physical risks, and I want to take a moment to remember the death of a worker at a Myer distribution centre in the western suburbs. The worker was responding to a jammed item in an automated stock collection robot and was crushed between the moving parts of the robot. And alongside the physical risks, we know that there can be devastating psychological consequences for workers. We are seeing new work-related conditions emerge like techno-stress and cyber sickness as a result of work intensification and the pressure created to increase productivity. Psychological health is a serious issue for Victorian workers. Nearly half of all working people will experience mental illness at some point in their life. 2 in 5 workers who've left a job report doing so because of psychological hazards. Over 60% of workers report experiencing burnout, which is much higher than the international average. We all know that work has never been more complex or stressful. Now, of course, when we talk about psychological health, we can't ignore the Victorian workers' compensation system. As a result of the changes to eligibility for work cover compensation implemented in 2024, the number of accepted mental health claim injuries has halved. When workers are denied compensation, they don't just lose income, they lose trust in the system that's meant to protect them. They face prolonged recovery times, financial stress, and in many cases, worsening mental health. No worker should have to fight for recognition of an injury that was caused by their job. So we will continue to push for a work cover system that works with injured workers, not against them. One that recognises recovery as a core part of restoring dignity, not bureaucracy. A system that listens, supports and helps people rebuild their lives after injury, whether physical or psychological. Having said that, the best way to help workers is to ensure that they aren't injured in the first place, which is why we are so pleased that on the 1st of December this year, the new psychological health regulations came into effect. Every jurisdiction in the country that has introduced psychological health laws has seen improved psychosocial safety outcomes as employers start to comply with a much clearer articulation of their duties. And I want to congratulate the Minister for delivering on this commitment and ensuring that there is a strong hierarchy of control for psychosocial risks. The Minister stepped into the job late in the piece, but he got this done. The new psychological health regulations provide employers with clear, actionable obligations and gives you as HSRs much needed support to argue for effective controls for the risks you and your workmates face. Now, everyone should have a copy of the new psychological health compliance code in their conference show bags, and I'm sure this will come up throughout the day. Now, I want to close by thanking our speakers today, especially the HSRs that are going to be sharing their stories and leading the fight for better and fairer laws and workplaces that protect workers. And I want to congratulate all of you for attending this year's HSR conference. Now, first up, I'm pleased to welcome the Deputy Premier, Minister for Education, and in particular relevance for today, the Minister for WorkSafe and the TAC, Ben Carroll. Ben, would you like to come up and speak? Please welcome the Minister.
Thank you, Will, for those warm words. And can I thank you all for being here for what is such an important conference. Can I also acknowledge that welcome to country by John Terrick, and to be part of a government that is doing treaty and truth-telling and recognising our First People that their land wasn't ceded, and to be making that march towards supporting them to have a life that we all have and take for granted here in the great state of Victoria. And for everyone part of the union movement that's been with us on that journey to treaty, I thank you all in this room as well. As John also said, I'm also the Minister for Education, and it's not lost on me that our first Indigenous people were our first educators, our first teachers, our first students that have cared for this land for more than 65,000 years, and we continue their tradition. Can I also thank Will and the whole team from the Victorian Trades Hall Council for this really important conference. I've been a union member my whole life. My dad was an electrician. I know the value of workers, and I know the value of our HSR reps. The work that you do, the courage that you show in stepping up and showing up and speaking out for the safety of your members. That's why this conference is so important. And as Will said, to be sharing the stories later today is so important as well. To be here with Ash West, the acting CEO of WorkSafe, thank you, Ash, for being here as well. Great to see so many of you in the room today, but also it shows you your commitment to doing what we need to do to make sure everyone who goes to work does come home safe. There's nothing more important for a Labor government or for any person to be getting up every day and making sure that workers come home safe. And that is why the value of each individual in this room, the courage that you show, is so equally important. And earlier this month, we celebrated the 40th anniversary of Victoria's first Occupational Health and Safety Act. And we've come, many things have been done since it was introduced some 40 years ago, but we're still on that journey to making sure that every single death occurs is preventable. And that's why we must keep doing these conferences, turning up, talking and sharing those stories. That Act paved the way some 40 years ago for the role of the Health and Safety Representative, as you all know it today. And to think of what you've been able to do since then, that we do have one of the safest places to work in the world. And it's in no small part because of HSRs. You cannot underestimate your role in creating Victoria as one of the safest places in the world. We don't want to be one of the safest places, we want to be the safest place. And as a government, we are thankful for your contribution, your trusted support for your colleagues on the ground in the workplaces. From hospital wards to factory floors, building sites to long shifts at night, in office blocks or on the docks, we know it's workers themselves, represented by HSRs, who best understand the safety of their workplaces. The Allan Labor government will always stand with workers and do all we can to support you in making workplaces safer. We know, as a government, we're very proud to introduce the workplace manslaughter to make sure it is a criminal offence for bosses, that employers are held accountable. Our nation-leading effort to ban the use of engineered stone is really important. Two key reforms that could not have been done without the work of the Victorian Trades Hall Council and the support of the union movement. As Will said, something I'm proud of, on the 1st of December this year, the new psychological health regulations will commence. This will send a really strong and powerful message to bosses that protecting workers from mental hazards is just as important as controlling physical hazards. And we know, as the conference today and the theme, Rage Against the Machine, we know artificial intelligence, digitisation, automation and so on are transforming the nature of work for every single one of us. No one is immune from it. And as a government, we are aware that many workers are concerned about how this does change the issue and the substance of safety at the workplace. And while there's no doubt that AI does bring many opportunities, it also brings many uncertainties. And that's why we need forums like this. We need people to raise their concerns and their fears. We need to explore and get to the bottom of what are the potential solutions and work together to make sure in the world of automation and that sad story that Will said earlier today, a person going to work in Melbourne's western suburbs that did not get to come home. And we know automation is an issue of safety out in the workplace. And we remain steadfast in doing everything we can to ensure it isn't only used ethically, but it's also used safely. And that's why we're doing much work around the Parliament, around workplace surveillance as well. That's why we've also commissioned an independent review into the powers and supports for employer representatives under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. We want to make sure that HSRs and REOs have the right tools to protect their people in the modern, changing world of work. Part of our review will be looking at the impact of technologies, including AI. We do welcome your feedback. Please get in contact with your reps at Trades Hall or your union if you'd like to provide input. Like everyone, our government will continue to learn and evolve as technology changes, and we will continue to rely on the voices on the ground and the voices in the union movement and the voices at Trades Hall Council, because your voices do inform our decision making. Thank you for the work you do every day as HSRs. You make Victoria what it is today. By stepping up, having the courage to speak out for your fellow workers, that does take courage, that does take commitment, and that does come to respecting your fellow workers and making sure their safety is front and centre. Thank you for making our workplaces safer as a result. Please enjoy the conference and keep up the good work. Thank you very much.
All right, next up, I would like to introduce the Acting CEO of WorkSafe, Ash West. Please welcome Ash.
Thanks very much, Will, and thanks very much to everybody for having me here today. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we're meeting on today, and also the people who are dialed in virtually. John Terrick gave us a great welcome to country earlier, and he touched on some really important points, which was about everybody working together. And certainly in the safety space, everybody working together is what creates safe workplaces, and something that we're really passionate about. Also, I'd like to thank the Deputy Premier, Ben Carroll, and also Luke Halakari and Will and Trades Hall Council for the invitation to be here today. It's a really great honour. Today's conference is also really important timing for us because it's actually the last week of our Health and Safety Month. And as the Premier or the Deputy Premier mentioned, the HSRs have played an important role, and 40 years ago was the first Health and Safety Act, so it's a really important milestone for us, and it's been a really important Health and Safety Month. We know that HSRs are tangible to workplace, make a tangible difference to workplace safety, and it's incredible the amount of work that you all do. I had the real honour of being able to present Mick Pouchet, and I don't know whether Mick's here today, is he here? Here he is. Well done, Mick. I presented Mick the Health and Safety Rep of the Year award at our WorkSafe Health and Safety Awards, and it was a real honour to present somebody like Mick, who's really passionate about workplace safety down in the Glenelg Shire, his award, and he just really represented the work that everybody here does. Mick came to being a HSR through his own workplace injury where he lost a finger, and I know that many of you in this room today have come to be HSRs because of workplace injuries that you may have suffered yourself or that you might have witnessed, or supporting people who have been injured in that workplace, and it's created a real passion. And the one thing that I see whenever I speak to HSRs in particular is that passion for workplace safety really comes through. And as WorkSafe, it just warms our heart to see so many people who are dedicated to the cause of keeping workers safe at work. It's an incredible, it's an ignoble cause that we all take on, and for us to know that there's such a great ecosystem out there of people that really help bring that together is really heartwarming for us, and we really want to thank you for all the work, and congratulations again to Mick on his award. Thank you. Round of applause for Mick again. Well done, Mick. I think Mick did a WorkSafe webinar yesterday. You've been everywhere, Mick. Well done. Thank you. I'd also like to just also mention that being a HSR is an additional responsibility that many people take on. And we also do understand, as the Deputy Premier mentioned and Will mentioned, that often these roles come and they're very difficult roles to play because often you are providing advice to management and upper levels of management who maybe don't want to hear the advice that you're giving them. And we understand that is a really difficult position for you to be in. But we also understand that training and support for HSRs and managers is critical for us to achieve our 30% reduction of fatalities and 20% reduction in serious injuries. And those targets, as I mentioned before, are not things that we can do on our own. They're things that everybody needs to contribute to, and HSRs play an incredibly important role in that, which is why we have our HSR support officers at the end of the phone to answer any queries that you may have about your rights and powers. And if things don't go well or you're meeting challenges in the workplace, we've got our industry representation support teams that are here to also work with HSRs, employers on resolving any disputes. And it's why we continue to listen to you in forums such as these today. You're our eyes and ears on the ground, and as I said before, the role that you play is incredibly important. The Deputy Premier also touched on the theme of today being technology, and I'd also like to add to that. WorkSafe is about Victorian workers, and we too are monitoring the impacts of any technology or rapid changes in workplaces. Rapid evolution of technology in large numbers across the Victorian state and the economy have really significant impacts to the way that people work. Any fast-moving significant impacts to the way people work means that there's potential for health and safety impacts as a result of that. Automation presents many opportunities, and opportunities that I'm sure many organisations are looking to take advantage of. But it is complex and we need to get it right. We need to fully understand how to implement these new technologies. We also know that incorrect assumptions, messy data, unrealistic targets, and pressure to get new technologies implemented could have dangerous consequences for workplaces. I wholeheartedly agree with the Deputy Premier's comments that forums like this today are invaluable for people to be able to talk about what they're seeing in the workplaces and the impacts that may be arising as a result. As I said, HSRs play a crucial role in WorkSafe. We know that workers and employers, as I said before, that everyone needs to work together in order to achieve great outcomes, and that's why today is such an important day, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today, and I hope you had a great conference. Thanks very much.
All right, Minister, would you like to join us? This is where the magic happens, folks. Right, now, don't forget that you can put your questions through on Slido. Thus far, I don't have any questions, but I've been hosting this conference now for a number of years, and I reckon I can pick some of the questions that you ask, because you generally ask the same questions, particularly of the Minister and the CEO of WorkSafe. So I'm going to kick off with that. You mentioned before, Ben, the HSR ARIO review. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that's aiming to do? Is that on? Yeah, that's
it is.
Good.
That will is again putting safety front and centre. We know out in workplaces there is often putting it sort of bluntly, a power imbalance when it comes to the rights of ARIOs getting onto work sites and being able to do their job. So Eugene White, who is probably familiar with many people in this room, is undertaking that review. That's been something, again, a bit like the psychological regulations that's been kicked around for a long time, Will, but I've made a commitment. I want to push this through and make sure, you know, at the end of the day, safety is just so important. In the year 2025, in any year, there should be no deaths. And if that means making sure that our HSRs and our ARIOs have the powers to do what is needed to keep their workers safe, that's what we're about. So we have a IR expert undertaking the review. We'll come back with a series of recommendations. I'll continue to work with trades and consult, and we'll do everything we can do to make sure our workplaces are safe, but our ARIOs, HSRs have all the powers and tools they need to do the work they need to do to make sure they are safe.
All right. So just if you, those of you who are in union, if you want to talk to your union about that review, and if you've got ideas about things that would make your lives easier as HSRs, then now's the moment, all right? Ash, on that, one of the things that we always get a question about is around the fact that in a lot of workplaces, the HSR is an expert because they've had to do training. They've done the 5 days of training. They do the refresher. They talk to the, they've often, in many cases, they have union support, but they deal with managers who often don't understand the role of an HSR, who might have a problem with that and push back against that. That frustration around managers' knowledge, can you talk a little bit about what WorkSafe is doing around that piece?
Yeah, thanks, Will. As I mentioned when I spoke earlier, we've got a really clear strategy around 20% reduction in injuries and a 30% reduction in fatalities, and we know that that's not possible unless workplaces work together, and that includes workers and the employers, and the important role that HSRs play in that is critical. So what we're looking at from a strategic point of view is not just training for HSRs, but also management training. So training for managers to be able to understand what are their obligations under the Health and Safety Act, and what's the role of the HSR, so that they can more greatly appreciate the role that HSRs play in terms of being their eyes and ears on the ground, and be able to feed that information through them in a way that's not threatening. So I think in that case where there is that power imbalance and there is an information imbalance as well, and a knowledge imbalance, that managers can sometimes feel threatened, and that's absolutely not the reason for HSRs bringing things to management. It's because of the safety of workers. We want to make sure that managers have the right level of information and feel comfortable in having those conversations with HSRs from a level of knowledge.
Excellent. And also, you talked a second ago about the fact, so firstly, there's a shout out here to the WorkSafe HSR support team, who, they do a great job. So if you don't know about them, you should absolutely find out about them. Obviously, if you're a union member, first place to go is your union, but the HSR support team are there. Do you happen to know what's the most common question that the support officers get asked?
I don't know the answer. That's a question without notice, Will. That's not fair.
It's not me.
No, I don't know, but certainly happy to feed that back, and we'll put that back through some channels if that's appropriate. But yeah.
Excellent. And you talked a second ago about the support that is provided to HSRs through those HSR support officers, and I think you also talked about there were other officers. So can you talk about, so one of the questions we get asked a lot, and it's been asked again, is around that discrimination, which that HSR review, I'm hoping in part will deal with this question about HSRs getting discriminated against, and the management training will help with that. But what is it that HSRs can do to get help? Obviously, if you're in a union, there you go, but to get help if they feel like their employer is discriminating against them on the basis that they're an HSR. And the note is that there are very few prosecutions for employers doing this, even though it is actually against the law to do it.
Yeah, I think that's where the industry rep support team that I mentioned earlier, I think that's a really important role, because that's where the escalation of things that are not particularly going well in the workplace. So the HSR support line is HSR advised, but the industry support group is for those types of issues. So I think you're right, Will. I think the union is a great place to go in the first instance. I think peers as well. So it's great that there's so many people here today that are making connections and are able to speak to peers and build those networks. But the industry rep support team is also there to ensure that they're providing the guidance and the information required in those particular tricky situations. But also, obviously, just to make the point quite clearly that clearly discrimination of any form is not appropriate in any workplace, and there is certainly mechanisms to be to deal with those things through a number of channels, including the employer, which, as I said before, is often difficult given the fact that it's often the management that we're talking to here. So yeah, that's why the industry rep support team is there to provide that advice.
And just to add to that, if I can, Will, when the psychological health regulations come into force, this will be a really important cultural change for employers. Any form of discrimination is a psychological health risk and a psychological hazard that must be eliminated in the workplace. So whether it's any form of discrimination, particularly towards HSRs that are just trying to make the workplace safer, that is something we will also address through the psychological health regulations, making sure there is a real onus on the employers to put proper prevention in place and make sure if they do need to have cultural change, that we implement it as well and oversee that. So a big job ahead of us. In the Victorian Public Service, we are already now having every single departmental head come to a meeting with Ashley and myself, a round table on what are you doing to try and be an exemplar and a leader in this space too. So I'm excited by the 1st of December approaching really quickly, and I think it can again put Victoria on that world scale around prevention in around all sorts of hazards that are occupying the workplace, particularly around the mental health hazards that are there.
So one of the questions, again, it's a very popular question, is around that discrimination against HSRs. I know that it's our view that currently, for example, in the Act, there's an obligation for people who, when a worker is injured, who are the return to work coordinators in the system, in the workplace, to have had some kind of training. Currently, there's no requirement in the legislation that manager who is allocated with responsibility for being the health and safety person at the workplace do any training. So I'm just going to flag with you that one of our recommendations and one of the positions that we hold, and I reckon every HSR here would agree, that the person in the workplace who is charged with being responsible for health and safety and managing that and working with the HSR from the manager's point of view, given that the HSR has to have done training, it would be good if that management person would also be required to do some form of training, I reckon. You see that that's a... There you go, that gets us there. Do we expect, this is probably, it's a big question, but do we think that there's going to be an increase in psychological safety issues as automation and AI comes into workplace? And is there any guidance available at the moment for employers? I know that the psychological health regulations, they break down a whole lot of different things, but is there anything there specific around the threat to psychological safety of automation, work intensification?
I think the guidance material in the psych regs does include information in relation to that, so a whole range of information in there. So it's along with the psychological regs that the Deputy Premier spoke about, there's also a lot of guidance material that goes along with that, and I'd encourage everybody to go and have a look at that because it provides some really clear breakdowns on what good practice looks like in terms of implementing a number of these technology changes and the impacts that has on workers. So my advice would be to have a look at that guidance material. I think probably the area that we probably need to continue to look at more deeply, and it touches on the issue that you spoke about earlier, Will, are the physical impacts of automation. So I think we've all looked at what are the psychological impacts of those things, because that's quite front of mind and quite obvious, but the physical impacts is probably something we need to continue to look at, and manufacturing and things as they start to put more robotics and automation in is certainly key in our thinking around that.
All right. So AI has adopted. Can you talk to me about, you mentioned before that there's an inquiry into workplace surveillance, which is one of the things. Where's that up to? Do you happen to know off the top of your head?
Look, it's underway. It's still in the early stages, isn't it, Ash? But it goes to that question you just had before around, essentially around how automation, AI, digitisation will have, I'm certain it will have an impact on the health and safety of our workplaces. When you take away that human element, you just naturally lose not only being able to do the job, I think 100% right, but you take away just that human element of thinking outside the box, so to speak, a bit of empathy as well. And look, at the end of the day, right through, we are going through a massive experiment as AI tech grow more and more in the workplace. And we need to be very mindful of the uncertainties it creates and have an open mind as well, particularly around surveillance, workplace pressures. No human being should also be compared to a robot. but you could see that this is going to be part of tracking, is going to be part of KPIs, and we just must be steadfast in making sure at the end of the day it's humans that count, not robots.
There you go. Yep, I agree with that.
Can I just add to that too, Will? From a technology point of view, and I mentioned in my address there around the data and the messy data and those sorts of things, and technology, I've worked with technology for many, many years, and the thing with technology, even in this AI space, is that technology is only as smart as what the people are telling it, and so that includes the data and the information that it's gathering. So I think it's just important to recognise that as organisations are implementing these things, that the source of the data that the AI tools are using is clean, it's understood, it's verified, because if you start using incorrect data with incorrect assumptions in that data, then that's when things can go terribly wrong. So that's what I would be encouraging people to look at. It's not the AI itself that's scary, it's the information that the AI is using in order to make decisions. That's the important part.
Thanks, Ash. I'll just say there's a kind of, it's a question, but I'll take it more as a statement, which is around the fact that along with the new tech, we need protections against workplaces implementing that surveillance tech without consent. As the Minister has said, there is currently an inquiry around workplace surveillance. It's a Victorian government inquiry, and I will say that that's very much the position it's still underway, but I'll say that it's the position of the trade union movement that surveillance tech should only ever be introduced in consultation with workers so that people know where and how their data is being stored, how that data is being used, that it's being used for good purposes, might be used for safety, but it's not being used for things like disciplinary matters, and that everyone is very clear about how long that data will be stored as well, because in some cases that data is then being taken and sold without the consent of the workers. I'm going to thank both of you for taking the time to both speak to us today and also to answer questions. Would you please thank Ben and Ash for the time today? Thank you, Ben. Thanks, Ash. And we're going to, yeah, no, you're right. You can go. There you go. Sorry, Ben has to get to Parliament and do busy, important things, and Ash has to go run WorkSafe, which I think we'd all agree is also a busy, important thing to do. So we're going to go to the next part of our session now, but just before I introduce the speakers, I am going to acknowledge that there is a bit of a gender imbalance in our presenters today. So in the union movement, and I'll just say to you up front, that the gender imbalance leans to the fact that we have a lot of men who are presenting today, including just then. So in the union movement, we do strive to champion diversity, and that includes in our HSR network, and that includes when we try and put together these conferences, because we think it's really important that we hear from lots of different voices that reflect the actual makeup of our workplaces. And as we say in our statement of solidarity, our diversity is our strength. So I'm just going to flag that before we kick off, but now I am going to kick off by saying, so first up, it is my pleasure to introduce an activist from the Transport Workers Union, Davis Clayton. Davis is a Melbourne delivery rider and Transport Workers Union member, and he's an active voice in the city's gig worker movement. He's used his lived experience to highlight occupational health and safety risks for insecure delivery workers. Do we have Davis? Brilliant. Up you come, Davis. Please welcome Davis.
Bit tall for this world. This is a lectern for regular height people. Hang on, I'll just do this. Hang on, let's do this. I'll get my stance. No, this is good. This is good. I like this. Yeah. Cool. So yeah, hi. My name's Davis. I am a food delivery worker in Melbourne. Does anyone here order that slop on the weekend when you're hungover or anything like that? No shame. Like I know it's trendy to say that you boycott it, but look, let's be real. Most of us don't. So like anyone order? There's like 5 people. I don't believe you. You're all lying. You get lazy. You order the groceries and all that sort of stuff. But when you order the food, quite often a delivery worker shows up and they've come on an e-bike, and quite often they look really tired. Sometimes their jacket's all torn up, or sometimes they're bleeding. they've gone through hell to get there sometimes, and quite often they're not getting paid very much money. I've worked for Uber Eats, DoorDash. I worked for the Chinese ones. They've changed names a couple of times. I tried to work for Milk Run, but they failed me on the safety test. And what's another one? Oh, Deliveroo. I did Deliveroo, yeah. And I've experienced quite a number of safety issues and all sorts of stuff in the, almost 10 years that I've been doing the work. I've done almost 10,000 deliveries. So up here, I guess this first slide, this is just a picture of the e-bikes piled up in the street. So quite often, the deliveries pay anywhere between as low as like $5 a delivery. Sometimes you'll get a batched order, you might get like $20 a delivery. And one of the problems with this work is it has really low network efficiency. So there's orders popping off all the time, but when they recruited all of the riders, they recruited too many. And they didn't do a very good job of matching the amount of riders to the amount of orders that they were doing. And there's been attempts to try and adjust that over time. They've never really gotten it right. So what's always happening is you sign up, you log in, and you don't get an order. And then 10 minutes goes by and you don't get another order. And then after maybe 20 minutes, you get an order and it's $5. And then you do the delivery and it takes about 20 minutes and that's over. And then you don't get another delivery for about 10 minutes. And it's like, oh, okay. And then the hour goes by and you go, oh, cool, I've made $5 for that hour. It can be pretty tragic stuff sometimes. It does vary for peak hours. So we've got some examples up here. The two on the left are a pretty standard kind of delivery for if you're riding on an e-bike. So they're usually about less than 5 kilometres. They'll pay somewhere between $5 and $10. And the one on the right is an example of someone who's delivering in a car, and that's like a batched delivery. So you're picking up 6 orders from Pet Barn in this example, and then you're dropping it off at like 6 different houses. If you get your calculator out and you look at the time that it takes, quite often it takes longer than what they indicate as well, because you show up, they haven't packed the order, it's not ready, and there's delays along the way. There's red lights, there's all sorts of obstacles. Maybe you get lost or you have a bit of a snafu along the way, and then you get to the customer's address and they don't answer the door. So that eats up all your time and that lowers that rate, and you quite often don't get compensated for those delays. So if you look at those numbers, even in the most ideal scenario, compared to the equivalent award rate under the Transport Award, it's still below award. So they're just openly, one of the great things about this is like when you work in a conventional employment relationship and your boss underpays you, they lie to you about it and they tell you you're crazy. In this job, it's refreshing because they just go, yeah, we're just underpaying you, and this is how much we're underpaying you. And this is how it works. They don't bullshit you in any way. They just straight up underpay you, and you go, okay. And compared to some of my previous lying employers, it's quite refreshing. In this next example, this is just some of the behind the scenes stuff. So this is some of the stuff you get in the app when you sign up. So the first example is Uber Eats. Years after they were running, they introduced this bike safety checklist. So every time you log in, you have to tick through this to sign in, and if you don't tick through it, you can't log in. And there's no person involved, it just comes up automatically. The top one is a little button that says, wear helmet. And when you hit that button, it comes up with, your camera turns on, and suddenly you see your own face, and it scans your face, and it goes to a server, and it compares it to a bazillion images that they've uploaded of people wearing helmets, and it decides whether you are or aren't wearing a helmet. It's usually pretty accurate, and I don't know if there's also facial recognition going on as well, so they do scan your face every now and then just to make sure that you're still you, and that you're not someone else. If you scan someone else's face, I think it kicks you out. And then you've got these other sort of safety items here, so secure delivery bags, mount phone, all that sort of stuff. A couple of years ago, they freaked out because they had a series of very high-profile deaths in the industry, and you would have noticed if you live in one of the major cities, they just gave everyone free high-vis, And so like 75% of the workers now have one of those high-vis jackets on. But even then, when you log in, it doesn't say, are you wearing a high-vis? So that high-vis is still very optional. A lot of people choose not to wear it. The next example, this is sort of a screenshot of some of the safety training they do when you sign up. The safety training they do across the apps is very bespoke, and it changes from app to app, depending which app you're working for. I have had an opportunity to sit across from the companies, and I said, look, safety is a really standard thing, and we do need like a standard set of safety training that's across all the apps. And they looked at me and they're like, oh no, we'd like to do it the way that we want, you know, the way that we feel that we should do it, with our special photos and with our branding. So this is an example from the Uber Eats training, and it's just this sort of polite request like, oh, can you please follow the local road rules? Just, you know, it'd be great if you could do that. As you go through all of this safety training, there's lots of stuff that's missing. There's lots of stuff that isn't in there. Most of it's just suggestive, like you should do this to be, you know, an optimal delivery rider. And it's highly insufficient. Another example on the right here, there was a series of, if you ever scroll through like YouTube or whatever, you see those dash cam video compilations. It's like people crashing their cars and swearing at each other on the dash cam. And quite often now in those compilations, what you'll see is examples of people who have captured footage of these delivery workers, and they're like on the highway, or they're on like a bridge, or just somewhere where they're not supposed to be. Like if you go up King Street in Melbourne, you can ride an e-bike up King Street, but then it turns into Kings Way, and you can't ride a bike on Kings Way. And there's lots of like CityLink highways and stuff like that, where people have captured footage of these delivery workers riding in the emergency lane and stuff like that. So there was, oh, sorry, can you go back one? Is there a person or is it AI? Yeah, cool. I managed to get an interview on Channel 9, and I said, look, the reason they're going up on these highways is because the app is telling them to go there. If you don't put in the correct instructions, it just gives you the car directions. It thinks you're a car, and it says, yeah, just go up on the highway, that's fine. And these young guys, they're like 18, 19, 20, young girls as well. They're from like South America, they're from India, countries like that. They're really eager to go out and make some money. And they just do what the app tells them to do because they don't know any better. I mean, if you've ever traveled overseas, you kind of find yourself on the wrong side of the road and all that sort of stuff, getting in trouble with the police. And they're no different, so they just go straight up onto the highway. And I went on Channel 9 and I told them that this was happening, and then the next day Uber just puts out this crappy little warning. And they're just like, yeah, can you just not go in the tunnels? Thanks. No mention of like highways or anything like that. And that's all they've done. They didn't fix the core navigational problem they have that's actually telling them to go on the highways. That still persists to this day, which is insane. So yeah, now we can go to the next one. Cool. So here are some examples of some of the ongoing issues. Some of them I've already touched on. So yeah, heaps of road hazards. So the roads aren't really fit for purpose for this kind of delivery work. So if you're from Melbourne, if you're not from Melbourne, apologies, I'll use some Melbourne examples. But on Russell Street, we've got separated bike lanes. Ride down one of those. You're very safe. The traffic's on the other side of the separator. But then if you happen to have a delivery on King Street, there's no bike lane at all. So you're sharing the same lane as cars and traffic, and they get really pissed off at you very quickly. They're not very considerate of your safety, and they'll beep at you and drive around you. They drive really close to you as well. Like I've been buzzed and brushed by heavy vehicles quite a number of times. I've had some real close calls. And when those calls get too close, you get hit by a car, and that's been happening quite a lot. There's the other road hazard I mentioned before, people going up on bridges and stuff, and there's just generally the bikes themselves have all sorts of issues, like the tyres go flat, the brakes don't work, people crash. Another issue is the incentive scheme. So there's an example up here. There's a few different takes on this, but this is a pretty common one. So you can see at the top, they say you've got from Monday till Thursday, and if you get these trips in these sequences, we'll give you these little bonuses. And when you get them, that's great. You get a little bit of extra money, and sometimes that gets you somewhere close to the minimum wage. It's still less than the minimum wage with these, but so you might do 5 trips. They give you $12. You might do another 5 trips, they give you another $14. But what usually happens is at the beginning of the week, you look at this and you go, okay, my target is I want to get like the fourth incentive. So you're rushing throughout the week to try and get this 4th incentive. And then what happens is on Thursday, you may be like 9 trips short, and maybe you slept in and you started late, and you're like, oh geez, I really want to get that $33. And this happens quite a lot. And that's when you start rushing, taking shortcuts, running red lights, so you can get that $33. Because there's nothing more tragic than when you've spent the whole week trying to get the incentive and you miss it by like 1 delivery, because they don't give it to you unless you get all the deliveries. And sometimes the incentives are really stupid. So instead of being structured like this, they'll say, get 50 deliveries by Thursday and you'll get $200. So it's not in pieces, you just have to get the whole thing. And sometimes there's these tragic weeks where you get 45 deliveries and you missed it by like 5 deliveries and you're just like, God damn it. And when you've got like 5 deliveries left, that's when you start rushing, that's when you start going faster and taking shortcuts. Low rates of pay I've already touched on. So the lowest delivery you can get is commonly $5. That's pretty much become the standard. It's not necessarily legislated, it's just sort of what's accepted as the lowest one. Seems to be inflation proof. It was $5 about 5 years ago, and with each year as CPI has gone up, it's stayed at $5. That's a little hack that these industries have come up with. And DoorDash tried to get it even lower at some point. They managed to get it down to $3 per delivery, and it was just a bit too on the nose. I think they got rid of that eventually. Limited inconsistent safety training. So I showed you an example of that slide earlier with the sort of crappy little reminder to respect road safety. And yeah, as I've said, it's really bespoke, it's really patchy, there's lots of stuff missing. I thought they got me this week because Uber put out a new training module, and I was like, oh damn, it's going to be really good and it's going to be perfect, and then when I go to this conference I won't be able to say, oh, they've got crappy training. But then I took the time out to actually go through it, and I was just like, oh god damn, they've outdone themselves here. So what they did is they've outsourced it to some like advertising agency, marketing bullshit, whatever, and they've got their own take on it, and they've gone, oh, how can we make this fun, you know? How can we make this appealing? Also, there's people speaking multiple languages, so we have to put in like generic stuff. So what they did is they rendered it in the style of like an arcade video game from the 80s, like Space Invaders. And it's like, oh, okay, I mean, if you could sort of make that work, like as long as it makes sense, like you can still get across the main safety concerns. And it's all just the stuff like, oh, don't overload your bag and make sure you stop at red lights. And there was about 10 modules, but the way that they constructed and the way they'd animated it, I was just watching it, I was like, this is confusing as hell. Like there's just like little video game characters going all over the place, and I'm like, I have no idea what is going on. And if I wasn't paying attention, I would just be clicking through and just going through to the end just so I can get this safety module out of the way so I can log in and go on the road. And I mean, that's what a lot of the safety stuff and the safety checks are in the app. You know, when you sign up for a new piece of software and you just click through the like bullshit end user license agreement so you can get through so you can use the software. That's what everyone's doing on these apps. They're not paying any attention to the content. There's no human there guiding you through or testing you to make sure that you actually understood what you've been told. It's just click through nonsense that you brush out of the way so you can log in. Lack of PPE and safety gear. Like I said earlier, the company's freaked out because of legal stuff and sent out a bunch of free PPE. So they sent out safety jackets, they offer bike lights and a few other trinkets. The bike lights don't fit, they're not customized to your bike, so they just send you a generic kit. The safety jackets, they're actually pretty good. They're not bad, they're waterproof, they're high vis. But I had an interaction recently, so they do fade over the course of the year, especially if you're out a lot in the sun and the rain, they start to wrinkle and fade and the reflective panels start to die. And hopefully they have like an offer to give you a refreshed kit every 12 months. This is specifically with Uber. But my interaction recently in the last couple of weeks, I was up for my new kit and I was like, cool, can I have my new kit? And I very quickly found myself in an interaction with a chat with a guy from an overseas call center. And he said, oh, you've already redeemed your kit. And I was like, oh, cool, I don't have the jacket. And he's like, well, it says here that you've already redeemed it. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that's great. But I think, you know, if we take an outcomes-based approach, it doesn't really, this doesn't really work unless I have the jacket. And I didn't manage to slip any examples in here, but these customer service interactions, I've worked in a call centre, so I do feel bad for these guys, and they're probably getting paid, you know, FA, but their process flow is optimised. They're just clicking with preloaded responses. So they just send you these preloaded responses being like, I'm sorry, blah, 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 and it just goes on forever and ever, doesn't answer your question. And there's just endless examples of people who work for these companies having these endless conversations that never end, that are just designed to just piss you off. Just like, can you just buzz off? And sometimes you can get through and be like, cool, I got the jacket. But most of the time their process flow is just designed to, you know, shut down your complaint or, you know, get you to piss off. Like, they're not interested. And yeah, I didn't end up getting the jacket, so I'm still reusing my old jacket. But yeah, it was ridiculous. Yeah. We also in Victoria don't have any access to DWGs, HSRs, the OH&S Act. That's because I'm a contractor and the legislation says employee. So unlike the other speakers, I'm not an HSR. I'd like to be, but we only have the laws in the ACT at the moment. So we have had some luck there with those laws, and we have managed to get some PPE and stuff like that. But yeah, as of today, currently in Victoria, no access to the OH&S Act, can't set up DWGs, and can't really enforce any health and safety standards. What have we got in the next slide? Ongoing issues. Yeah, so some of this I've already touched on. One thing we definitely don't have is union rights, so there's no inductions. There's no channels for having meetings, or, you know, there's no notice board. We have had conversations with the companies, and we have talked to them about putting content in the apps that connects them with, that promotes unions and connects workers with a way to join up with the union. As you can imagine, the companies have no interest in doing that whatsoever. With some of the upcoming laws, we might get some opportunities to put inductions into the apps, but as it currently stands, it's really hard to connect with other workers. It's really hard to get them to join the union, and a lot of them don't know what a union is. Like, they're teenagers, they're from overseas, they're only here to study for like a year or two, and when you go up to them and start talking about unions, they're just like, I don't know what you're talking about, I'm sorry. Like, sometimes you can break through, but even then they leave, they go back home after a year or so, and the churn just ensures that it's really hard to recruit people and keep them in the union. I've already talked about access to OH&S and WHS, and parity with employees. So the pay consistently is less than what you would make as an equivalent employee. I don't have any of the rights of an employee. I don't have any like meaningful dispute resolution. Like I said, you quite often end up speaking with the customer service person, and their whole agenda is just to shut down your dispute. So we do have a lot of issues with people getting deactivated. So what that means is, like, it's just like getting fired from work. So you go to log into your app one day and they say, oh, customer complained, or app detected unusual activity, you took too long, you were too slow. We've deactivated your account. And you just like, so I've been quite fortunate that's never happened to me, but there's hundreds and hundreds of cases of these, you know, poor kids that have come from overseas. They're just trying to fumble through. They don't know the streets, they get lost. You know, I had one case of a girl that I spoke to who, her tyre went flat, and she felt so obligated to finish the delivery. She like pushed her bike like another 1.5 kilometres to the house to drop off the order. And I just said to her, I was like, you don't have to do that, just like cancel the delivery. But like, what happens is when DoorDash detects that, they were like, oh, you were too slow, you did that too slow, you're deactivated. So we have had some luck with, I think it's in New South Wales, or it's at the Fair Work level, it escapes me at the moment, but we do have new deactivation powers. So we have been able to go to the companies and say, sorry, you didn't go through the process, you know, they didn't have a right of reply, you didn't have any evidence, please reinstate that person's account. And the Transport Workers Union has been able to flip at least like 200 deactivations since we've got those laws. So they've got a team up in Sydney that are just doing these constantly. They're just going through the evidence, fighting with the companies, endless email threads. It's just like my experience dealing with customer service, but they're just dealing with Uber's lawyers day in, day out. What have we got on the next slide? Oh, sorry, yeah, union wins, of course. DWGs interstate, so in Victoria, can't do DWGs, no access to the OH&S Act, but we have managed to do it in ACT, and we have had some luck in the past in New South Wales. So currently, I don't think we're having any luck in New South Wales, but we did have some luck with Deliveroo, so we did actually manage to get them to do a bunch of stuff. But of course, what did Deliveroo do? Classic corporate move. They shut down the whole company and they disappeared and they went overseas. So we had to start from scratch. But still having some luck in the ACT, we've got some activists up there who are in a DWG and are, banging them with requests. So that's good. This is the big one. So this is what everyone's waiting for. New Fair Work powers for minimum standards. So the government put in new powers in the Fair Work Commission to put minimum standards into contracting industries like the one I work in. And basically it creates something just like an award for contractors. So we can get minimum rates of pay, deactivation standards, all sorts of the stuff, breaks, things like that. There's no limit to what we can ask for in that. We're currently going through that process and consulting and debating with the companies. And as you can imagine, they're not that interested. But the legislation does require them to go through the process, and at the end, we will have some great new laws which will mean better standards for these workers. I'm getting the wrap up, so if you have any questions for me, I'll be sitting up here and we'll be doing the Q&A. So keep those in mind, and thanks for your time.
Oh, is this your phone, comrade? You might want that. So I'm now going to, here we go. And your helmet. Oh yeah, the helmet, it's kind of handy. So we're now going to hear from Professor Anthony Forsyth from the ACTU. He teaches and researches all aspects of work in the law, specialising in collective bargaining, trade unions, union education, labour hire, and importantly, the gig economy. Will you please welcome Anthony?
Wow, what a big audience. Thanks so much for the invitation to speak. First, I want to acknowledge and pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, the traditional owners of the land we're meeting on. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak. I actually used to teach and research on labour law, made the move over from university land to the ACTU legal team earlier this year. And really being a part of something like this and seeing the enormity and the strength of this movement and finding myself a part of it is really bringing home to me what a privilege it is to do this work and to meet all of you. What I want to do in the time available today is to give you a bit of a broad sweep of some of the regulatory approaches here and overseas that are starting to be implemented to protect workers from the really quite pernicious ways that technology is being deployed to threaten their safety. So if we can go to the next slide. Responding first to the picture that Davis has just painted so clearly and eloquently, I mean, it's the Wild West out there is what we're talking about with gig economy platforms that have been here in Australia for more than 10 years now, operating on this model, as Davis said, of everybody's a contractor, and what that really means is nobody has rights. But this does produce quite frightening safety concerns for riders engaged by platforms, riders and drivers. The first thing I want to mention to you is that the International Labour Organisation in Geneva this year agreed to adopt a binding convention and recommendation to secure decent work in the platform economy. Now, these instruments are currently the subject of consultation with national governments and will be finalised at the next conference in middle of next year. But based on the current text, what happens with international treaties is that member states then have to implement them in national law. And the kind of standards that would be included here would be really a game changer in terms of the global effort to combat what Davis has talked about in terms of what gig economy platforms have been doing. So these protections would apply to all workers who are engaged to provide services organised by a platform, so no issue around whether you're an employee or a contractor, which really defeats a lot of the business model. Platforms would have to take steps, so far as practicable, to prevent occupational accidents, diseases and injuries by assessing the risks of those and taking adequate preventive and control measures. And this includes, importantly, and it's mentioned in the text of the Convention, risks to health due to long hours of work and insufficient rest periods. Workers would be entitled to OHS information and training. Now, there's a bit of a gap here in terms of how much that involves consultation. The current text doesn't do enough, we don't think, to ensure that you're not only told and trained about how platforms operate, but also that workers are brought into that conversation and consulted, including about the automated systems that are being used. Because we know, and Davis has just hammered it home for us, about the damaging effects on gig workers of intrusive surveillance and performance management algorithms. We want platforms to have to consult before they introduce or change AI systems that affect workers' health and safety. Other elements of the Convention would be around ensuring that platform workers have adequate PPE and clothing. Workers have the right to remove themselves from work situations that present an imminent and serious danger to life or health, and workers are protected against violence and harassment at work. This is another big feature, for example, for rideshare drivers in a lot of countries, where there's violence and harassment occurring, whether it's online or it's in person, whether it's by the platform or whether it's by a customer. So it is a big win getting this far in terms of almost at the finish line with landing this international labour standard that member states of the ILO would then have to implement in national law. And we at the ACTU are working with the global union movement to win a strong convention and recommendation. But it is going to be a huge fight. I wasn't there in Geneva mid-year, but the people who were there, including our President Michelle O'Neill, have been very clear that the opposition from the employers, the big platforms, the big tech companies has been incredible, and that will continue into next year into trying to water down what we see as absolutely necessary protections for workers. If we can move on to the next slide, it's around the EU, so the European Union Platform Work Directive. So this is like an ILO instrument, but operating only at EU level, and then EU member states have to implement it, which was adopted last year. It's got even stronger protections for gig workers, including that at least every 2 years, the platforms have to, with the involvement of workers' representatives, evaluate the impact of individual decisions taken or supported by automated decision-making systems. That includes the impact on workers' working conditions, but also any risks to health and safety, including psychosocial hazards. And then, after doing that evaluation, the platforms have to assess whether the safeguards in those systems are sufficient, and if not, improve those systems to ensure they have adequate preventative measures. There's also a specific requirement that digital platforms not use automated monitoring or decision-making systems in a way that puts undue pressure on workers or otherwise puts at risk their safety and physical or mental health. So this would address what Davis was talking about in terms of how the algorithms that are used impose unrealistic on-time delivery incentives, and also how they deactivate riders if they don't meet these KPIs. So you can see the picture emerging that regulation in Europe, and maybe soon at the international level, is some way ahead of where we are at in Australia. We do have the new laws introduced under the Closing Loopholes Amendments in 2024 that do, for the first time, set minimum standards or enable the Fair Work Commission to do that. And as Davis mentioned, there's a case going on at the moment to set minimum floor of wages and other conditions for food delivery riders engaged by those platforms. And also the unfair deactivation, as he mentioned, there's huge numbers of cases coming through, and riders starting to be awarded compensation for unfair deactivation. And in a lot of ways, this is world first. But in terms of platforms and the impacts on safety, I think we're seeing regulation leaping ahead in other jurisdictions compared to where we're at in Australia. There is a bit of a danger that the technology that's tested in areas of precarious employment, like gig work, will increasingly move to the mainstream. And that's what we're starting to see in terms of the rolling out across workplaces of different types of AI, different types of surveillance, monitoring, keeping an eye on what people are doing in physical workplaces or when they're working from home. Collective bargaining is a potential opportunity for dealing with this. It hasn't started to occur that much yet in Australia, but European unions have been quite successful in negotiating collective agreements to deal with these challenges of AI. One particular example I wanted to mention is the German union Verdi, which has in the last few years signed really significant agreements with companies like Deutsche Telekom and IBM. And what these do is really strengthen worker voice. If we can go to the next slide, in terms of how technologies are used in algorithmic management. The Deutsche Telekom agreement, which covers call centre employees, has got three main components. One is around IT systems, so requiring management to consult with the Works Council, so the workplace-based representative group of workers, before they purchase new technology, and then doing an evaluation of the risk to employees, and in terms of assessing that risk, it's looking at whether the software can record or track data on employees. The second element is around workforce analytics. The agreement says that these tools have to be used to improve the working environment and support managerial decisions, but not to monitor individual employee performance or behaviour, or to make automated decisions without human oversight. And then the third element, which I think is probably the most interesting, is what they call the AI Ethics Manifesto. So this is about building trust in the AI systems that are being implemented by increasing their transparency and increasing the involvement of workers in their introduction and implementation. So for example, any AI systems that are going to be implemented have to be designed so that employees know that they're interacting with a machine. There has to be a human element to decision making in relation to decisions that have a significant effect on employees. If an employee is affected by a decision that's partly made by AI, they can insist on a check of that being conducted by a person with human oversight. And certain types of use of AI are prohibited. So using it to gather personal information about employees, like their political opinions, or their religious belief, or their union membership, or their interest or propensity to engage in union activism, perhaps in a new site where the union hasn't already been operating. But we know, for example, in the United States, this is a big thing, that AI systems are used as a tool in union busting as well. So having a commitment like this in a collective agreement to prevent that is really important. According to a report by the ILO looking at both the Deutsche Telekom and the IBM agreements, what they found is that these had improved workplace safety while encouraging more positive workforce views of the AI-based systems that were adopted, because employees were protected from invasive monitoring or privacy abuses associated with algorithmic management. And the agreements established a joint decision-making process and oversight of the future adoption of technology based on clear principles and an expert-based review process with worker involvement. And in a lot of ways, that's a long way from where we're at in Australia in terms of what we're seeing at the moment is just pretty much, again, the Wild West in terms of AI is just being rolled out with very little consultation or discussion with workforce. In terms of collective agreements here, just looking at workplace surveillance as one element of AI systems, if we can go to the next slide. There's a recent paper by Professor John Howe and some of his colleagues at Melbourne University showing that only about 5% of enterprise agreements approved in the last couple of years across 12 industries had any provisions relating to workplace surveillance. And out of that 5%, only some of them prohibited the implementation of surveillance or required consultation with workers or unions before their implementation, while others were quite permissive in terms of allowing surveillance to be rolled out, for example, relating to safety or disciplining workers or for any purpose with no constraint at all. In terms of the ACTU position, we support the introduction of AI through meaningful consultation with workers before the decision to introduce the technology has been taken, because workers deserve to have a say in what technology is being introduced and what it's being used for. I mean, really AI does have productivity enhancing potential that could transform working life for the better. But there is another scenario, and that's uncontrolled AI with devastating effects on workers. And it's already playing out in Australia. We've seen it recently with ANZ informing staff that they were being made redundant by an automated email. And there'll be some finance sector union representatives here later today to tell you about some other horror stories from their sector, which does seem to have a lot of this going on. And it's for these reasons that the ACTU took a proposal to the government's Economic Reform Roundtable in August, really asking the government to require employers to reach AI implementation agreements with their staff, including with worker representatives, before technologies are introduced. And that these agreements need to have guarantees on job security, on skills development and retraining, on transparency over what technology is being used, and protections on the collection and use of worker data. One last thing I'd like to mention, a potential step in the right direction in this area. There's a bill in the New South Wales Parliament at the moment that would amend the state WHS Act to provide that a person conducting a business or undertaking that uses a digital work system must ensure that the allocation of work by or using that system is without risks to the health and safety of any person. And for these purposes, a digital work system includes an algorithm, AI, automation, an online platform or software. And in meeting the new duty, the PCBU would have to consider whether the allocation of work by the digital system creates any of a number of different types of risks, whether it's excessive or unreasonable workloads, excessive or unreasonable metrics that are used to assess and track performance, unreasonable monitoring or surveillance, or discriminatory practices. The bill would also give WHS entry permit holders in New South Wales additional powers to access and inspect digital work systems where this is related to a suspected contravention of the WHS Act. So matters that could be inspected by a permit holder could include code or algorithms used in the digital system, performance metrics, records, data logs or audit trails produced by the system. And the New South Wales IR Minister Sophie Cotts has said in introducing the bill that the new powers and duties will help to ensure that existing worker rights and protections are appropriately balanced with workplaces embracing new technologies to drive innovation and productivity. While advances, she added this, while advances in AI and digital services will drive rapid change, both in and out of the workplace over the coming years, these changes must not come at the cost of health and safety of workers. So I think that's a pretty good note to end on. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm not sure if we've still got time for questions.
Thank you. I don't think we're going to. Yeah. All right, so would you please join me in thanking both Davis and Anthony, as is the way, give them a round of applause. As is the way with conferences, for those who attend them, we have run out of time for questions, unfortunately. But we are going to have a quick word, just before we go to morning tea, we are going to have a quick word from one of our sponsors. So would you please welcome Matt Toner from Incolink.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, my name is Matt Toner. I am Chief of Staff to our CEO and EGM of Corporate Affairs. I'm also a proud member and former official of the United Workers Union. I'd like to start today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge all of the work that you do every day as HSRs in making your workplaces safer. HSRs are the foundation for workplace health and safety. It's not an easy job to speak truth to power and standing up for your fellow workers. It takes guts and integrity, and I commend each and every one of you for that important and often thankless job that you do. For those who are unaware of who we are and what we do, Incolink is Australia's leading safety net for the building and construction industry. We collect redundancy contributions from employers every week, and we hold them on trust for employees when they find themselves out of a job. We pay that money out. While we're holding those funds, we invest them and use the returns to support individual workers and the industry as a whole through training, health and wellbeing programs, and research and advocacy. We've been around since 1988, and while the way we do things has changed a lot, the heart of our work never has, supporting workers through change and uncertainty. And right now, as new forms of technology and surveillance reshape how people work, that support matters more than ever. It's clear from the discussions here today that workplace surveillance can carry a sizable mental health impact for employees, and that's something that we are working hard to address, no matter the cause. We've recently announced for our industry that we are going to provide a dedicated mental health nurse to deliver crisis support intervention to building and construction workers throughout the workday. This will complement our existing supports, including free counselling and a trained Blue Hats peer-to-peer support network, and ensure they can be deployed on-site, face-to-face, and at short notice. We've also committed $500,000 to delivering 3 dedicated AOD rehabilitation beds over the next 12 months. Technology and innovation have changed how we work, sometimes for the better, but as we've seen today, often for the worse. But no matter how much things change, the fundamentals that truly make a workplace good and safe will always stay the same. What workers need isn't new or complicated, it's what they've always needed: respect, fair pay and conditions, and to come home safely at the end of the day. That's what Incolink is here to support. Through our redundancy scheme, training programs, and wellbeing services, we're here to provide security, stability, and support through every stage of a worker's career. Our role at the moment is limited to the construction industry, but we believe there is value in expanding the portable entitlements model to other industries to ensure they have the same level of support. Whether it's helping someone retrain, navigate redundancy, or access mental health care when they need it most, our goal is to ensure that no worker is left to face those challenges alone. Because at the end of the day, technology may change the tools we use, but people will always be the foundation of any industry. And it's people, HSRs like you, standing up for your workmates every day, who make that foundation strong. At Incolink, we see our role as working alongside you in that effort, making sure that when workers need support, security, or a second chance, it's there for them. Because looking after each other isn't just part of the job, it's what keeps everything ticking. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Matt. Now, before we go to morning tea, a couple of quick reminders. If you have not registered or signed in for today, can you please do that during morning tea at the registration desks? Also, don't forget to check out the sponsors tables and the merch at the BTHC table. And just a note that we are running HSR refresher training tomorrow, and you can sign up at the BTHC table or via our website at weareunion.org.au. Now, the majority... Wait for me to say go. Just so you've got instructions. Now, the majority of dietaries, including vegetarian, vegan, halal, dairy and lactose-free, are already catered for at the main buffets. So, and the catering is either side of doors 5 and 6. If you have other dietaries, you should visit the allergen station, which is located at the far corner, it's over there, of the main foyer outside. It's under the second set of stairs and it's marked with a giant flag that I think says allergies. I may be wrong. All right? And we are going to reconvene in here. I want you back sitting in your seats at 10:30. 10:30. All right, go. All right, comrades, just keep coming in. For those who have arrived a bit late, there are still spaces down here that you can fill up. I just want to let you all know that our attendance here today, we have a record 951 HSRs attending here today. And for those who don't know, if you think that there are empty spaces, they actually had to open the upstairs area. And then we also have 300 folks roughly attending in the region. So in total at today's conference, we have over 1,250 HSRs attending the conference today. But that is why that we do ask that you move down and fill in all the spaces. All right. So as you're coming in, I'm going to start the next session. So I'm going to welcome you all back. I'm going to let you know that our next speakers are both from the Finance Sector Union. So folks, would you please join me in welcoming Matthew Rowe and Nicole McPherson. Now Matthew has a strong background in governance, strategy, risk management and organisational planning. These are skills that he has applied throughout his IT career to strengthen worker representation and build sustainable structures for collective action. And Nicole McPherson is the National Assistant Secretary at the Finance Sector Union. She leads the FSU's national organising and industrial teams, where they have achieved significant wins, such as defeating AMP's attempt to impose constant video surveillance on all staff working from home. Would you please welcome Matthew and Nicole?
Good morning, comrades. It's fantastic to see so many of you here today. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting today on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Workplace surveillance has long been an enormous part of the finance sector and how it manages its workers. When we think back to the 80s and the 90s, what this looked like was contact centre workers having to clock in and clock out. But when we think about it now, every single moment of a finance worker's day is subject to workplace surveillance. From when you get to work and you sign in with your key card, you log into your computer, your employer can track your keystrokes, they can track your mouse clicks, but it's becoming even more insidious because a lot of finance workers now have to download apps onto their mobile phones, their personal phones, for things like two-factor authentication. So the moment you wake up and you pick up your phone, not that you're supposed to do that, you're not supposed to pick up your phone as soon as you wake up, but for those of us who do, from the second you do that, your employer is able to monitor what you're doing. So why are we talking about this now? We're talking about this now because the improvements and the rapidly increasing technology has meant that the surveillance that workers are subject to is increasing dramatically, and it's happening daily. This is no longer some kind of future possibility. This is a situation that we're seeing happening in the finance sector today. And one of the greater issues that we're seeing is that the increasing use of artificial intelligence means that all of the data that's gained through surveillance can be much more quickly analysed and conclusions drawn in a way that has never been able to happen before. Now, today you've got the double act from the FSU. Matt's going to talk about what surveillance looks like in the finance sector today. He's going to be looking at the health and safety impacts of these types of surveillance and what we can do in our workplaces to address these impacts and make our workplaces safer for all. I'm then going to have a chat about the lack of regulation of workplace surveillance, the role of health and safety reps, you all here, and what the laws can do, and also how workplace surveillance is being addressed around the world. And I know that you heard some content on that this morning from Comrade Forsyth. What we'll also be talking about is how we can create safer workplaces through better regulation, and how at the heart of that is workplace organising. I'll now hand over to Matt.
Comrades, good morning. I'm Matthew Rowe. I'm a finance worker in technology, and I'm also a proud FSU member. Comrades, in my role I get approached on an almost daily basis about the marvels of AI, the latest and greatest technology, how we can track workers, all with the guise of making better business decisions and greater places to work. That image you're about to see up there, that image that you see up there, that company, there's a company on the right-hand side that sells AI technology to track interesting and potentially interesting, the company selling the software that you can see up on the right-hand side where that image is, it chooses to highlight that image to potential customers. That image, comrades, is from a 2024 West Australia Teachers Union delegation heading off to a rally. That software detects unusual or interesting events across a large surveillance network. So, where does the finance sector come into this? We are the early adopters of all technology. We operate in a highly competitive environment, especially amongst the big four banks. We're essentially in a tech arms race. We're the first company to implement these technologies to reduce cost and increase profit wins. CBA makes around $10 billion a year in profit, so there's plenty of money to funnel into tech and lots of money to invest in the shiny new tools. Because of this, finance workers have almost always been subject to the most advanced forms of surveillance available. A few years ago, this surveillance looked like calls being monitored, listened to, or needing to swipe your access pass to get into the building. However, as technology has quickly evolved, so too have the methods of surveillance. Finance workers, like many of you in the room, are subjected to keystroke monitoring, chat and email monitoring, security cameras following you around all day, automated AI note and call reviews, sentiment tracking, where AI detects and interprets the emotion and tone behind written and spoken language. So, what are the health and safety impacts of workplace surveillance? Within the current structures of our work health and safety systems, monitoring could produce a number of risks and hazards. Low job control, where every aspect of work is being controlled and measured, poor managerial relationships, i.e. managers not trusting workers to manage their own time during work, high job demands, where work demands are ever increasing, and whilst not technically a category of hazard, the fear of retribution from being subjected to so much monitoring. This fear ties into other hazards and can even contribute to a lack of organisational justice. The risks associated with these hazards are high, and the likelihood of the technology causing stress and anxiety that can lead to injury and illness is also high. This has a significant impact on workers. Consider one of my fellow finance workers, Priya. When she wakes up, she picks up her phone, which has apps from her employer installed. Apps like two-factor authentication, Microsoft Teams, a desk booking software. Those apps have a ton of permission on her phone, and effectively, from the moment she wakes up, her employer can start to track her. When she gets to work, she's immediately under video surveillance. She swipes through the gate with a building pass, it automatically calls the elevator, it takes her up to her floor. Her employer knows exactly where she is from the moment she's walked in the door. Once she gets to her floor and sits at her desk, she taps her building pass to activate her desk and check her in. Her employer knows exactly how long it took to get from the lobby, ride the elevator, and get to her desk. And from the moment she opens her laptop, her keystrokes, her mouse clicks, and her screen are all monitored to make sure that she is working on what her manager wants. And of course, this is all to ensure that she's working as efficiently and quickly as possible. The better Priya performs, the more tasks she is assigned. But when her output drops, her manager immediately stops by to ask what's going on. If Priya gets up and leaves her desk, her boss knows, and if she's not on an approved break, she is asked to justify why she wasn't in front of her screen. When she leaves the office for the day, she swipes out of the building with her pass. You might think the surveillance is over. But those apps on her phone keep pinging away, and she continues to be tracked long after she's left the office and arrived home. She has no job control, and interactions with her manager are limited to when she is asked to do more work or explain why she hasn't done enough. Every minute, comrades, of her day is accounted for, and she knows if she raises concerns, her job's at risk. This is the reality of the health and safety impacts of surveillance in the finance sector. This is by no means an isolated example. This represents the experience of workers right across the sector. We're talking about workers being required to use tools with no operational purpose but to monitor them. And we're talking about monitoring that doesn't even look like the outcomes you produce, merely the inputs. And of course, none of this was to create a better outcome for the customer. It was to create a faster and maybe even less expensive one. And what's the cost of all this? It's disengaged and burnt out workers. So, comrades, what can we do about workplace surveillance to address these impacts and make sure that our workplaces are safe for everyone? One of the major issues that we face in our sector is the identification and assessments of these risks being very poor. The hazards are often ignored or dismissed and just brushed off as being part of how business operates. HSRs need to keep in mind that these kinds of things are health and safety hazards and not just the custom and practice of the sector or workplace. The rights of HSRs are there to be able to insist that these practices are identified as hazards and included in the risk assessment process. So I challenge you, think about workplace surveillance as a health and safety risk, and address workplace surveillance as a workplace health and safety issue, not just how things are done. As an example, you could add workplace surveillance to the agenda of your HSR committee meetings and think about what surveillance has been used. Ask your employer what is in use, what information has been stored, how has it been used, who has access to it, and when does it get destroyed? If you don't know the answer to these and you feel like it's a risk, then it's inspection time. Remember, you have a right to inspect your workplace to identify surveillance and how it's been used. So make sure that you include workplace surveillance as a risk in all assessments. Surveillance is a risk, and it needs to be raised and addressed. Employers are required to confront the issue and explain how it's going to be controlled. So, as you all know, comrades, HSRs have powerful rights to address unresolved workplace health and safety issues. So remember your rights to investigate issues and monitor and control the measures. If the issues cannot be fixed through consultation, HSRs can use PINs or even directions to cease work where there's an immediate risk of contravention of the OH&S Act. So comrades, to achieve all of this, you need to make sure that you build out your HSR structures in your workplaces. This will ensure that you can help keep everyone safe at work. It means we've got more trained people to monitor and enforce our rights. And remember, communication is essential so our colleagues know the work we're doing and how we can be part of it. Comrades, I'll finish up and pass over to my colleague, Nicole.
Good morning again, everybody. Can I just have a quick show of hands? Who was surprised about that level of surveillance? Is that a level of surveillance that you're aware of, or is that something that's news? Interesting. And look, I've got to say, it's been news to us as well, and we're the union for the sector, right? I think that this really goes to one of the points that Matt made, that unless we ask what kind of surveillance is taking place, we simply don't know. And the reality is that because of I've got to click the slides. That's my job. And this is a great slide too, so I'm very happy to have it on the screen while I talk to you about this. I think we would all assume that that kind of intrusive, invasive surveillance that's causing a massive health and safety risk, surely there would be laws to stop that, right? But no. This is one of the most ridiculous things when it comes to workplace surveillance in Australia, that it is occurring in an almost entirely unregulated space. Now, I'm going to quickly cover off what the laws do say, and I'm going to start with the Commonwealth, where you might be thinking, well, there's the Privacy Act, maybe that does something. And it really doesn't, because the issue with the Privacy Act is that the Privacy Act specifically excludes employee data. So anything that is classified as employee data, which is sort of basically everything to do with an employee, as the name would suggest, isn't covered by the Privacy Act. So the Commonwealth, no help. The Victorian laws, unfortunately, are really out of date now. The Victorian surveillance laws are kind of envisaging that there might be things like wiretaps. If you're thinking about, like, if anyone is old enough in the room to know, like a Get Smart type scenario, where we're talking like shoe phones. If someone's trying to like tap your shoe phone, you're probably safe. But if they're doing anything with a computer, anything with a mobile phone, the laws just have not kept pace with the improvements and the developments in technology. Now, New South Wales and the ACT, loath as I am as a proud Victorian to ever sort of praise New South Wales, but the New South Wales and ACT laws are much more modern than the Victorian ones, and they include some pretty good things. They include things like a notice requirement to conduct surveillance, that there can be no covert surveillance without a court order, and there are also things like surveillance is banned in private areas, so lactation rooms, toilets, things like that. Now, the Victorian government did do an inquiry last year into workplace surveillance, which we think has been an incredibly important step to get better regulation in Victoria. And there were a number of recommendations on the Victorian legislation, and some of those things were that surveillance must be reasonable, necessary and proportionate, that employers must notify and consult with workers on any surveillance, and employers must disclose how data is collected, stored, used and shared. But what does that mean for workplace surveillance in workplaces right now? And in Victorian workplaces, it means that it's pretty much happening in the Wild West. There's no regulation right now that helps except for work health safety regulation. And that's why this is such a critical topic for our time together today, because the only real legal protections we have are those that come via the health and safety regulations, which are strong and give all of you in the room superpowers to be able to control workplace surveillance in your workplaces. All right, excuse me. Okay, good. Now, I mentioned the laws in New South Wales that require an employer to notify their employees when they are conducting surveillance, and imagine how that would change things, right? If your employer had to tell you what kind of surveillance they were undertaking on you while you're at work. Imagine what that would do to organising in the workplace if your manager came to you and said, hey, actually, we're monitoring every single keystroke you do and every single action you take at work. Imagine what that would do to the culture at the workplace. So there's a really good reason why employers don't want to do this, because it might be one of the things that leads to the revolution. So, you know, there's good reasons. But what we're already seeing in New South Wales is employers try to get around the laws that already exist there. Now, you would have remembered a moment ago that the New South Wales laws require disclosure of when there is going to be surveillance in the home, for example. So AMP, one of Australia's biggest financial services companies, they decided to issue new employment contracts to all of their employees. And you might think, well, that's a pretty boring administrative process. It's probably neither here nor there. We knew that AMP really wanted people to sign these contracts because they offered them an incentive, bribe, to sign these contracts, that they would get a bunch of shares from the company, and they wouldn't be able to get a performance bonus if they didn't sign it. So AMP really wanted people to sign it. And of course that made us think, well, why are they so keen to get people to sign these contracts? And if you turn your mind to clause 37, AMP and the group may carry out continuous ongoing camera surveillance on or around the premises of AMP and in any other place where you work. And where do people work? They work at home. So we went to our members and said, hey, this actually gives AMP the right to do surveillance in your home. Are you cool with that? And you'll be shocked to learn that they were not in fact cool with that. They were very upset with that. And Many other people were upset with that, including basically every industrial relations academic in the country and the media. And AMP tried to say, no, that's not what we meant. We're not going to do that. And we said, okay, that's cool. Take it out of the contract. And they said, oh, no, we can't do that. I said, really? Well, if you're not going to do it, why do you need that clause in the contract? Oh, well, it's tricky. And then they tried to say, well, how would we do that? We don't have cameras, but you know what they do have? They have your phone and they have your laptop, which both have cameras and both have microphones, and both are able to be centrally controlled by IT admin to turn on either camera or microphone or both at their will without you even necessarily knowing. So this whole innocent baby act, oh, we couldn't possibly do such a thing. What are we going to do? Come to your house and install the camera? They don't need to. Because every time you have your work phone or your work computer in your home, or you've downloaded a work app onto your personal phone that gives permissions for camera and microphone, they already have a listening device and an ability to look at you through video in your own home. And the thing was, AMP said the quiet part out loud. And they tried to give themselves a right to do surveillance in the home via this contract. Now, how many people would bother to read a contract that was given to them at a new job? And I'm sure a room of HSRs, all of you are going to read it word for word. Obviously. But it may come as a shock to you to learn that some people aren't really into legal documents and kind of go, oh, look, the boss isn't going to try and screw me, I'm just going to sign it and get it done. And that's what most people did with this contract. And when we said to them, do you realise what you've just signed? They didn't realise. So the New South Wales legislation works, but you can give your boss permission to surveil you, and you can give them permission to surveil you in your home. And by signing this contract, that's what hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people did, until we were able to fight back and make them change this contract for everybody. The thing was, though, they didn't actually change the contract because they didn't want to do that. What they did was they instead got the CEO to write a letter to everybody saying that they wouldn't enforce this clause, but it is still there. So when we think about whether employers are serious about this kind of thing, and this isn't some shonky, tiny, wacky company. This is AMP, a company you may have heard of. These are big companies doing this. And we all know that once the big companies do it, they're paving the way for smaller companies to do it as well. They're creating a precedent that everybody else can follow. Pardon? Oh, no, it is. Absolutely is. Because I'm sure that if you were being bullied at work, I'm sure that they would allow you to use the surveillance for your own benefit. 100%, right? And this is one of the funny things. We have gone to employers on a number of occasions and said, we know that you do constant tracking of, the workplace. Can we get that footage because our member's being bullied? Oh, no, it's only for our benefit. It's only for our purposes. Huh, interesting. All right, so this is a photo from the AMP AGM that we stormed and had some call flutes, made a big mess of their AGM, and that was actually what led to them changing their mind on this. Now, what I would like you all to think about as you look at this photo is what actually shifted AMP here wasn't the laws, because they weren't particularly helpful. What actually shifted them here was organising. And that's what I'm going to keep coming back through in the, I'm sure, quite limited amount of time we have left together today. That organising is the critical point when it comes to using the laws that we do have and the incredibly powerful rights that you do have to make a change to workplaces and make our workplaces safer for everybody. So how do we control workplace surveillance in our workplaces? The first thing we do is we organise. Everything we win at work comes from organising. And that starts with, as Matt said, establishing workplace surveillance as a health and safety issue. Now, this is one of the really insidious parts of workplace surveillance that has kind of been packaged up as just technology change, that it's nothing to do with work health safety, it's nothing to do with anything else. It's just like getting a new version of Microsoft Word. It's no biggie. It is, in fact, a biggie. Now, some of you might have seen the news yesterday that there were some news articles about how Microsoft Teams, if anybody uses that at work, is going to be able to track your location. Now, it might make you feel a little bit better in your soul to know that that was a massive beat up, but what Teams will be able to do going forward and what Microsoft is implementing in December is the ability for Teams to know when you're at work versus when you're not at work. And we know that if Teams is going to do that, then the ability to track other IP addresses is likely. So there's a whole array of possibilities that are open to companies and are open to tech companies to give to our employers to increase surveillance of us. So where we've got the baseline now, we know that it's only going to increase going forward. The only way to oppose that is with organising. Now, what do we want to see in policies and enterprise agreements? This is one of the most powerful ways that you have to be able to address this regulatory gap, short of there being regulation. For anyone who's involved in negotiating enterprise agreements or has the ability to go to employers and talk about policy, we want to see things like transparency. We want employers to be telling you when they are conducting workplace surveillance, what kind of information they're collecting, how it's being stored, and what it's being used for. Specifically as well, we only want to see workplace surveillance happening where it's legally required or where it's required to protect your health and safety. If there's any kind of surveillance for any other purposes, it should not be legal. Now, the Victorian Trades Hall did an exceptional submission to the Victorian Government inquiry on this front, and that was, I think, one of the most compelling points in that submission. But that's one of the things that we should all be thinking about when it comes to regulation of workplace surveillance. That surveillance should only be where it's necessary to comply with the law and it's to protect our health and safety. It's also incredibly important that we have a right to the data that is collected on us. One of the things that might occur to you is if all of this information is if I'm being watched all of the time, what's happening to the data? And that's a really good question that nobody really knows the answer to. It's a major problem. Now, I don't want to just leave you thinking that better laws are the only option here and we're all just kind of waiting until better laws come into being for us to all be protected here. The reality is, as Matt went through earlier, you have enormous, I'm getting the wind up, which is very appreciated. Thanks, Tom. The one last thing I want to say is that I want you all to have a think about the powers that you have as HSRs and what you can do today to try to contain workplace surveillance in your workplaces. So you've got things like the ability to request information, to inspect workplaces. All of those powers that you have raise workplace surveillance as an industrial issue and give you the ability to have that genuine conversation with your employer about what's going on and to start to contain it where it does have a negative impact on workplace health and safety. I'm so thrilled to be here with you all today. It's incredible to have an entire room full of HSRs when, as I say, you do all have superpowers when it comes to our workplaces. I want to thank you all for your attention today, and I'll hand over to our next speakers.
Yes, could you please thank Matthew and Nicole again? That was amazing. I mean, terrifying, but amazing. So now, please join me in welcoming three amazing HSRs and United Workers Union members. So Rod de Young, Shannon Thorneycroft and Dave Thompson. Now, you may remember that before Christmas time last year, buying food and drinks from Woolies became rather difficult, and we saw all those photos of empty shelves. Well, all three HSRs were involved in the Woolworths strike, which in large part was a reaction to excessive KPIs and workplace surveillance. All three are very passionate HSRs fighting for their workmates' health and safety in the Woolies warehouses. I'm going to hand over to Rod, Shannon and Dave.
Go for it, my friend. Hello, everyone. My name is Dave. I'm here representing HSRs on a big scale that happened. You may remember when you went to shops, you were probably cursing us when you couldn't get any groceries. It was partly because of us, but mainly the main reason is what we're going to explain about today. So there are three of us here today, but we're here to represent the big team in a multi-site effort. Shannon and I work together at one of the Woolworths distribution centres at MSRDC, and Rod works at a different site. He's going to introduce himself now.
So the framework was introduced to my site in late 2023. It was presented as a time and motion study, and we were told by the company there's nothing to worry about. The system worked by establishing engineered standards, calculated standard times that it supposedly would take for a certain warehouse task to be completed. Every movement and output of warehouse staff is tracked against these standards. Now, we had issues with these standards and the way they were being established, including, but not limited to, they were measured at times when there was no congestion in the warehouse. They assumed the products were all pulled forward and easy to access. Fatigue was not taken into account, and they are measured in isolation, not part of an 8 or 10 hour shift. Now, consultation was also poor. At my site, there are 4 HSRs in the afternoon and approximately 10 HSRs on the morning shift. Only 2 out of the 14 HSRs were told, not consulted, about the system being in place. Woolies considered that to be proper consultation. The union then got an email saying that the employer was introducing the framework, but they softened the language around it in response to the initial concerns that were raised about the risks related to musculoskeletal injuries. And then all of a sudden, people started getting disciplined based on what their pick rate numbers were. Instead of having a conversation with people about their pick rates, the company was prepared to discipline and fire people based on what computers told them. The framework set an expectation to pick at 100% of the engineered standard every day. This encouraged unsafe work practices and for team members to cut corners. The message was, work unsafely or lose your job. Now, in our warehouse, for those who don't understand warehousing, we have a 3-bay rule, which basically is meant to keep a minimum distance between pedestrian and forklift traffic. Now, team members had to speed up their work to the point where this wasn't being obeyed. They were taking shortcuts, which led to an incredible increase in both physical and mental injury. While the company was saying, it's just an automated shed, it will not affect you, people were getting disciplined for not working hard enough based on their metrics. Workers started to register an increase in mental health issues due to having to consistently push themselves. People started to be paranoid that they were going to get disciplined or fired at any time. The anxiety levels amongst team members rose to the point that some workers were breaking down in tears in the car park before starting their shifts. Some staff were taking personal leave because they were too scared to go to work. We were not seen as individuals anymore. We were just numbers on a graph. Workers were being actively discriminated against based on their age, illness, gender or pregnancy. However, one thing the framework did do, that it galvanised members to a common goal. We all knew the surveillance framework. We all knew with the surveillance framework, team members were going to be picked off one by one. We just didn't know who was going to be first.
How do I change it? There we go. So at our site, which was Melbourne South in Dandenong, we suspected that Woolworths were running the same software like they were in Rod's shed, but they hadn't actually told us and let us know that they were doing that. We just assumed, as we were getting told by the union, that that's what was happening, so we had a little bit of an idea. Initially, we started responding using the OH&S structures, such as a couple of HSRs doing assessments and employment surveys, employee surveys, which highlighted the hazards and the increased injuries that were occurring. From an industrial angle, the 2,500 members across the sheds that the United Workers Union were in filed disputes about the failure to consult about the rollout of the framework under all of our respective enterprise agreements. The company wanted to deal with those as a big whole group, but we each wanted to do it individually and follow the proper process that they set out in our agreements. The volume of dispute led to Woolies putting a little bit of a hold on the rollout of the framework. Same again, they didn't actually tell us they put it on hold, but we sort of worked out they did because they stopped coming around asking us questions. Simultaneously, multiple sites, I think there was 5 of us involved in that big strike in November last year, and we all got together and decided to run and do it and just push the company to implement some better ways of doing it.
So long and short, wages were obviously important as part of the strike, but the strike was mainly about conditions. Bargaining went on for months. The company was not prepared to compromise on the framework. This was a deal breaker for members. What is at the point of a big pay increase? What's the point of a big pay increase if you lose your job 3 months later? Obviously, workers wanted a big pay increase too, but everyone thought this was a little bit more important. Members resolved to take strike action, which obviously we didn't want to do, but we went through the negotiation process, and in the end we thought it was probably the best outcome. Well, it was the best outcome, wasn't probably. We knew if we asked for the framework to be scrapped 6 months later, they would come up with a new tool or a new name or some sort of new process that would come out and just do the exact same thing again. So we focused on the principle that as long as someone was working to the best of their ability, they should not be punished. It was kind of like lawyer speak that came out in the end of it all. It was basically, so to give you a bit of context, the company wanted us to work 100% every day, all day. In the end, it came back to working to the best of your ability, which means that, and I can use myself as an example, if 80 or 85% was the best that you could do, then that's what would be accepted. And to give you context too, when you're lifting and you're doing things like voice order picking, usually, like any of us, especially when you get older, we're all different ages, come from different backgrounds, all have different strengths. At the end of the day, 100% every day, all day was pretty unreasonable to ask. So at the end, after the strike of 17 days, we won the fact that it was to the best of your ability, which I think was the best outcome for everyone and was an amazing win. I know that people probably suffered at the time by not getting groceries on their shelves, but at the end of the day, it was a very favourable outcome, and it was realistically the best one we could have got at that point in time.
So as Dave said, the sites that didn't take action, they were left without that clause. So I think there's still another 10 or so sheds across the country that are trying to get that. Perth and Queensland had that framework rolled out where Woolworths have conceded that it may not be a massive risk to health and safety, but the HSRs and that, we're still trying to fight them on that. The language that they use to inquire about our performance at our site has sort of changed a little. Instead of coming up and asking us, oh, why aren't you hitting your targets? They come up and go, hey, you all right? Do you need some help? Are you struggling? Do we need to have a little bit of a retrain, which is just being followed by someone telling you to pick boxes again? It's not so much helping you pick it properly. It's just, oh, we know that you're not doing it properly, but we'll make it look like we're trying to help. The clause we got was to not be disciplined for your pick rate, so long as that we're working to the best of our ability. So some people will still take the piss a little bit and not quite do the right thing, but the majority of us, so long as we're just doing the right thing and doing what we need to, it's pretty easy to not have to worry about having any of those awkward conversations. So we're still not getting we're not getting called in for having excessive gaps, because we can sort of justify it by saying we have to having a rest, because at the end of the day, if we're picking water all day or flour, it gets heavy and it slows you down. And to the extent of our site has put in extra cameras to surveil and watch what we're doing in certain areas. Like, we get watched from the time we walk in to the time we leave. The only place I don't have a camera is in the toilets, although I'm sure they'd love to. But they essentially, they had some older cameras that didn't quite get enough viewing angle of some of us workers, so they installed new cameras that we were told at the time were to watch the machines and make sure the machines didn't overheat, but that was just one of the bosses telling us something that he thought would be the right thing, even though we found out later on that they were just more cameras to watch us. So as opposed to having ones that couldn't see, they can watch us everywhere. So there's not really anywhere to hide, even when we're not in the shed picking. If we're in there looking after machines, making sure that they're not breaking down, it's still getting tracked no matter where we are. And I think that's us. Unless we've got more from Rod. No, I think that's
there
it.
is. I think that's us.
Yep. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, and our final speaker today in this session is Jake Goldenfein. Now, Jake is a law and technology scholar and lecturer at Melbourne Law School and a chief investigator in the ARC Centre of Excellence for Automated Decision Making and Society. Jake studies platform regulation, data governance, digital surveillance, and the governance of automated decision making. His work explores the ways law constructs the data economy, digital surveillance, including facial recognition, and tools for governing automated decision-making like a human in the loop and AI explanations. He is also, you'll be very happy to know, an elected HSR in his DWG and has lent his expertise to union submissions in this area of law reform. Will you please take it away, Jake?
Hi everyone, thank you for that very long and academic-like introduction. I also want to acknowledge that this talk today and where I work is unceded Wurundjeri land, and where I work at the law school just up the road, which at Melbourne University, which is Australia's law school, when doing acknowledgements, I like to think about the role that the law school has had over time in producing the kinds of expertise and training that have been involved in the project of ongoing Indigenous dispossession in Australia. I also really want to thank Will and Dominic and all the organisers here and all the organisers out there who are doing all the food and coffee and everything, because we know that's very, very important work. And it's it's an honour for me to address you all, because it's really a pleasure when the research we do at the university has some sort of tangible connection to people's lives, and it's a nice opportunity to talk about something that we just heard so materially about, which is engineered standards. So in the world that I'm in, the idea of engineered standards, workplace surveillance, is often talked about in the language of algorithmic management. And algorithmic management is something that sort of popped up kind of recently as something that we need to pay more attention to. It's often described as some of the more nefarious elements of platformized labour, which we heard earlier from our comrade from the transport union and gig work described, sort of that kind of automated work direction and decision making sort of, and surveillance leaking into other kinds of workplaces. But it's not really a new thing, right? And we heard actually just from our comrades before talk about the time and motion studies that they heard about, that they experienced in their workplace. This idea of time and motion studies comes from a very old idea called Taylorism, where managers would go into workplaces, find a work task, break it down into the micro level, measure the amount of time it took to perform each little task, and then produce a kind of scientific ideal of how long any particular work task might take, such that you could sort of rationalize a work activity into its most efficient form. In Australia, when this sort of first happened was in the 1990s. So these questions that we're dealing with now aren't new. We've actually dealt with them in the industrial relations system before in Australia some time ago. So we had in Australia a sort of pre-platform but still computer digitalised version of Taylorism that prefigured what we just heard about, this idea of engineered standards. Now, this history, I think, is actually important, not just to say, oh, these technologies have existed for a long time, but also to learn about how the industrial relations system responded and what it did and didn't achieve. So these technologies were brought to Australia from American consulting firms like Dallas Associates, Borman Associates, OMI International. And it's why they were sometimes described by industrial relations scholars as the Yankee speed up. These big American consultancies in the 90s were hired by almost all the dominant firms in Australian grocery: Woolworths, Woolstar, Franklin's, Coles, Composite Buyers, David's, and ostensibly this was to help realise efficiencies in the system. So what the consultancies did is they came into those workplaces and, just as you heard, they measured the time taken for workers to complete specific tasks, and then they built a system of performance evaluation to be measured against the ideal amount of time taken for those tasks. These standards were then integrated into these computerized control systems that managed the reception and replenishment and dispatch cycles in warehouses, and they created this KPI that you heard just before of the pick rate, right? The pick rate against which individual workers could be monitored. Now, having a pick rate that workers might not achieve also led to what I think is just as significant a workplace innovation, which was the ATR, or the Assembly Technique Review, which was the disciplinary process that workers failing to achieve pick rates were obliged to go through. So, you know, on one hand, this is about efficiency and this is about automation and automating decision making, but on the other hand, it's about giving employers a sort of objective and quantitative form of evidence for imposing discipline and control, because there was an argument that part of the reason the employers went to these consultancies to acquire these tools is because the unions at those workplaces were too strong. They weren't able to impose discipline. It was all interpersonal. They didn't have enough evidence, and all of a sudden they had these objective metrics that they could use to impose their discipline. And I think this actually leads to a very important point that all my research sort of outlines, and I might get in trouble for saying this because I'm not sure if it's the position of the union, but I'm an academic, I'll say what I want. The idea of human oversight of automation in workplaces is very important, but it's never a solution on its own. Because what you often have are humans who are very happy to have objective metrics that they're happy to say have made the decision for them. What they really want is to be able to wash their hands of the responsibility for the imposition of control. And that's what those metrics enable. You have to remember that it's humans who spec and design these systems, and just having a human at the end of the line doesn't necessarily change anything, especially if they're trying to implement what that workplace is trying to implement in the first place. So we had this then challenge in the 90s by the New South Wales branch of the National Union of Workers, who challenged the introduction of these management techniques on the bases that we just heard, that they enabled wage suppression, that they sped up work, that they turned workers into robots, and they degraded workplace safety, and that they undermined workplace cohesion. The NUW launched a number of really aggressive industrial actions, a series of strikes, and they did achieve some action. So in response to these strikes, in particular one at the Franklin's warehouse in Challura in 1994, that's in New South Wales, the grocery industry lobby requested that the New South Wales Industrial Relations Commission produce an inquiry into the use of engineered standards. That was the demand necessary to end the strike. So the commission then convened for 2 years, heard lots of evidence from employers, the consultants who brought them in, experts, union reps, workers. And unsurprisingly, the commission ultimately affirmed the employer's right to use these systems. But they also wanted to curb some of the more egregious implementations, and to achieve that, the Commission required consultation with employers and unions, the production of consultative safety committees to employ that the deployments of engineered standards were fair, equitable, and safe. And at this point, you might be wondering, how did we get from there to what we just heard about, where the questions of safety were so ignored? At the time, the Commission requirement for these sort of consultations and consultative safety committees was a fairly significant limit in New South Wales, and there was no equivalent in any other jurisdiction in Australia. There was no other requirement for consultation or union or worker involvement. So New South Wales did achieve something. But this didn't stop the New South Wales branch of the National Union of Workers from persisting with their campaign against engineered standards in their entirety. So what happened then over the next decade is, rather than fighting over what fair and equitable and safe deployments of engineered standards might mean, the NUW continued to challenge the introduction of these tools only in their entirety at the Commission, and they continued to lose those challenges, unfortunately. This meant that there was ultimately no consultation, no arbitration over what it meant for these tools to be deployed in a fair, equitable or safe way. And when you look through the history of the Industrial Relations Commission's cases, what you see is the Commission effectively saying again and again, this is not our responsibility. We refuse to consider the safety of engineered standards as a matter of workplace law. It has to be dealt with at the level of consultation. It has to be dealt with at the level of the workplace. Unfortunately, the absence of discussion about that meant that these technologies continued to proliferate further and in more unmanaged and unregulated ways. So engineered standards sort of seeped out across logistics industries. The need to document them in EBAs disappeared. They became normalised and unmanaged, and even the need for consultation disappeared because it had never been actioned. And you can understand this was a tricky spot for the NUW, right? Accepting the need for consultation meant legitimising these technologies in the workplace, but failing to consult meant not curbing their most egregious excesses. So I suppose the point here is that engineered standards as precursors to contemporary forms of workplace automation and surveillance and even AI that we have didn't come out of nowhere. They've been fought over before, and they need to be fought over again now, because some of the most egregious problems of these technologies have never adequately been managed, right? And what we have to accept in the workplace is a politically contingent question. It's a matter for struggle. And there are new terrains opening up where we can have this fight, where this struggle can be prosecuted, both at the level of workplace, both at the level of organising at workplaces and by HSRs, but also at the level of policy and regulation. So you've heard just before, 5 minutes? All good. You heard before, we've had this Victorian parliamentary inquiry. The problems of workplace surveillance, the proliferation of automation and automated decision-making have come to the attention of government again. The recommendations that came out of this inquiry were effectively to close the gaps that we heard about before in our privacy laws having exemptions for employee records and our surveillance devices acts in Victoria, for instance, being not adequate and not up to date in Australia. But I actually want to say, even if we fix the holes in that legislation, that is hardly enough for managing these problems. The main reason that is hardly enough is both the surveillance devices regimes and the privacy and data protection regimes in Australia are very individualised regimes. They rely on individual consent, right? So you put consent into your workplace agreement and it's done, right? So what we need is actually something else. And the Victorian government has acknowledged that these forms of surveillance and workplace automation are harmful for workers. And they've acknowledged to a certain extent that they concern whole workplaces. So we have to argue for these to not be individual matters of consent, but matters for workplace management. So now's the time to agitate for reform on surveillance issues in workplace, to make it part of your EBA, to make it an explicit part of EBA bargaining, and to make it an explicit part of the HSR agenda. And we've heard a lot today about the new psychosocial regulations that are relevant to Section 21 of the OH&S Act, which HSRs can read and pursue, and indeed make workplace surveillance and automated decision-making part of the agenda by thinking about the psychosocial as well as physical safety effects that they have in workplaces. At the same time, I think that we need new regulatory baselines to deal with surveillance and automation and data management more directly at work. And one of the issues that we've been advocating for in my union and research that I've been doing is on the idea of workplace data rights. Can we go one more slide? Right, workplace data rights. So, as a starting point, we definitely need to improve our existing privacy regimes to make sure they cover all workers. And we definitely need to update our surveillance devices laws to make them more relevant. And we need a better understanding amongst employers and workers to ensure that surveillance doesn't have problematic psychosocial and physical safety effects under the OH&S Act. But what we also need is a comprehensive package of workplace data rights and a comprehensive workplace surveillance regulation. It's not just algorithmic management, it's not just engineered standards, it's all the pervasive forms of surveillance that we heard about from our comrades in the FSU, range of tools proliferating through workplaces that intensify and de-skill work, that amplify workplace safety risks, and that amplify and enhance employer control. To start with, when we start thinking about workplace data rights, yes, we need transparency into data collection, data gathering, data processing at workplaces, but we don't need it just at the level of individuals. We need it at the level of workplaces. We need to understand how whole groups of workers are being surveilled and compared against each other and compared against standards. We need transparency not just for individuals, as individuals might be able to demand under privacy or data protection laws, but for all workers in particular workplaces. We need skilled third parties, be they trusts or unions or co-ops, who have the computational capacity to analyse the data that workplaces are collecting and produce insights for the benefits of workers, not for employers. We need prohibitions on workplace technologies that decrease the quality of work. We need prohibitions on workplace technologies that create any safety risk at work. We also need to recognise that the work we do, especially perhaps in the AEU or the work that I do in the National Tertiary Education Union, is increasingly a form of data work, right? I make lectures, I write lectures, I teach students, those lectures are recorded. What I'm also turns out to be doing are producing digital data for training AI systems, right? That's extremely valuable. We need a data rights regime that recognises the value associated with the production of data and that gives some of that value back to workers. We also need a properly resourced regulator to ensure compliance and enforcement, be that WorkSafe or the Information Commissioner, as the Victorian Parliamentary Inquiry suggested, or if necessary, a new body with the capacity to deal with all these workplace digital data issues. And that's me, and thank you so much for listening, and please enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you. All right. Unsurprisingly, we do not, amazing presentations, but we do not have time for some questions. But we have had some questions around what can we do, which is what we just touched on there. So if I could just go back over what we've heard people say, it's about using the tools that we have. So as HSRs, you have particular powers, including to get information. And as unionists, we know if you've negotiated enterprise bargaining agreements that include consultation clauses, there are powers that you have there. We also need some new tools. If you don't have enterprise, we need to get some proper consultation clauses that are specific to this particular area, that do consultation and consent, making sure that people are clear about what technology is being introduced, how it's being introduced, how the data is being kept, how long it's going to be kept, what it's being used for, what's being tracked. That information needs to be available. And the question around how that is, well, I think Nicole touched on it. No one can do this alone. We have to do it in collective, and that means that we organise, and the best way we organise is in our unions, for enterprise bargaining agreements, for new laws. And we need to change the conversation about new technology so that it's not just about these amazing set of benefits that everyone's going to have, but that we all understand that it can be great, but it can also significantly harm workers, and we need to put in place the limits around that harm. So that's my summary and my best answer to the questions that have come through about those sessions. Now, we are now going to go to breakout sessions. Now, just stay seated until I get this done. Just hold off, all right? Now, to those of you who've been here before, you know the drill. To our regional folks, hey, good on you for attending. You get to log out now and speak to your trainer. Have an amazing rest of your day. Everyone else, when I say go, you'll have 10 minutes moving time to get to the breakout rooms, and then we'll then have a breakout session before lunch. And at 12:15, lunch will be served on the ground floor, and after lunch, everyone needs to go back to their same room at 1:15 for the second part of the breakout. Now, breakouts, like every year, are divided into union groups. In your show bags, there is a piece of paper. On one side is a list of union groups and the room location of that group, and the other side should have a map as well. Hold on, wait for it, get your piece of paper out and see where you're going to be. The rooms are located on levels 1 and 2, so you're going to need to head to your allocated room by using the escalators out there or the stairs. Hold on. There's also lift access to the levels. Now, outside there is signage. We also have trades hall staff who are probably wearing marshal's vests who can help get you to the right room. And a quick reminder that certificates of attendance will be available for collection at the conclusion of the second breakout session from the sign-in desks. All right, go!